The air in the platinum boardroom was thick with the scent of expensive cologne and the metallic tang of impending professional slaughter. Sarah, the lead product manager, stood at the head of the mahogany table, her eyes gleaming with a predatory sharpness as she adjusted her silk blazer. She didn't just look like a leader, she looked like a judge delivering a death sentence. At the far end of the table sat Leo, the project coordination specialist, his hands resting flat on the surface, looking exactly like the disposable office drone Sarah had spent months convincing everyone he was. Sarah tapped a silver pen against her tablet, the sound echoing like a ticking clock. She didn't wait for the CEO to sit down before she threw the first punch. She pointed the pen directly at Leo's face, her lip curling into a sneer that was visible to every executive in the room. "Let's not waste time with pleasantries," Sarah snapped, her voice cutting through the murmurs like a jagged blade. "The Apex launch has failed. The client is threatening a massive lawsuit, and our reputation is currently burning in a dumpster fire. And why? Because our coordination specialist, Leo, decided that reliable support meant complete incompetence when it mattered most." She paused, letting the weight of the accusation settle over Leo like a shroud. The executives shifted in their seats, their expressions turning from neutral to disgusted. Sarah didn't stop. She projected a slide onto the massive 98-inch screen behind her. It was the final project submission, and highlighted in blood red was Leo's digital signature. He signed off on the final deliverables. He was the last person to touch the file. He saw the errors and he sent them anyway. "Leo, do you have anything to say, or are you too busy thinking about which cardboard box you'll use to pack your desk?" Leo opened his mouth to speak, his voice barely a whisper. "Sarah, if we could just look at the communication logs." "Logs? You want to talk about logs?" Sarah barked a laugh, a harsh, mocking sound that made the junior associates in the back row flinch. "I have the only log that matters right here." She slammed a stack of papers onto the table. "I told you verbally 3 times that the technical specifications needed a final check from Marcus. You nodded. You said you had it handled. And yet, Marcus's name is nowhere on this sign-off. You bypassed the expert because you wanted to play hero, and now the hero has burned down the castle." She leaned over the table, her face inches from his, her voice dropping to a low, venomous hiss. "You are a glorified errand boy, Leo. You were hired to fill the gaps we didn't have time for, not to create craters that sink the entire company." The room erupted into a low buzz of agreement. One of the vice presidents shook his head, looking at Leo with pure pity. "It's always the quiet ones," he muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. Shearer's smirk widened, her ego inflating with every second of Leo's silence. She was in her element, the master of the narrative, the untouchable architect of blame. She turned to Marcus, the senior technical consultant, who was sitting in the corner with a neutral, almost bored expression. "Marcus, isn't it true? Didn't I explicitly tell Leo to involve you in the final verification?" Marcus didn't look up from his notepad. He simply gave a slow, deliberate nod. Sarah turned back to Leo, her eyes dancing with triumph. "See? Even our most senior expert confirms it. You went rogue. You failed, and frankly, your presence in this room is an insult to everyone who actually worked on this project." Leo's shoulders slumped. He looked down at the table, his fingers twitching slightly. To anyone watching, this was the moment of total defeat. He looked broken, a man who had realized the trap had closed and there was no way out. "I thought I was doing what was best for the timeline," Leo stammered, his voice trembling just enough to make Sarah's eyes light up with sadistic joy. "The timeline?" Sarah mocked, her voice rising to a theatrical pitch. "You didn't care about the timeline. You cared about feeling important for once. In your pathetic, administrative life, you thought that by putting your name on that final file you'd finally be seen as a key player. Well, congratulations, Leo. You're the MVP of the biggest failure in this company's history. You're not a coordinator. You're a liability with a paycheck." She turned to the CEO, her expression shifting instantly into one of professional concern. "Sir, I recommend immediate termination, not just for the failure but for the blatant disregard of my direct verbal instructions. We cannot have a cancer like this in the department." The CEO looked at Leo, his face hardened into a mask of disappointment. "Leo, do you have any defense at all? Any reason why I shouldn't fire you right now and let the legal department handle the rest?" Leo looked up. For a split second, the trembling stopped. He looked at Sarah, who was currently preening like a peacock, her chest out, her chin high, convinced she had just delivered the final blow. He then looked at Marcus, who finally put down his pen and looked Leo straight in the eye. The silence stretched for 5, 10, 15 seconds. The tension was so thick it felt like it might shatter the glass walls of the boardroom. Leo reached into his bag and pulled out a small, battered laptop. He didn't look like a man about to beg for his job anymore. He looked like a man who was about to pull the pin on a grenade. "I don't have a defense," Leo said, his voice suddenly steady, devoid of any fear. "Because a defense implies I did something wrong. What I have, however, is a very specific set of eggs that Sarah seems to have forgotten exist." Sarah's smirk flickered for a fraction of a second, replaced by a flash of irritation. "Records? What records? I told you I gave you verbal instructions. Are you going to lie and say I didn't?" "Oh, you gave them," Leo replied, a cold, sharp smile finally touching his lips. "But you forgot one very important thing about the role of a coordination specialist. My job isn't just to fill the gaps. My job is to document exactly who created them." He tapped a key on his laptop, and the 98-inch screen flickered. The slide Sarah had prepared was suddenly replaced by a high-resolution screen recording of a private project management dashboard that Sarah hadn't touched in months. "Let's look at the requirement change logs, shall we? The ones Sarah says don't exist because she only does verbal confirmations." Sarah's face didn't just pale. It turned a sickly shade of gray that clashed violently with her expensive foundation. That's a private dashboard. You had no right to access that. It's unauthorized. This is a breach of company policy," she shrieked, her voice cracking as she looked at the CEO, her eyes wide and pleading. But the CEO wasn't looking at her. He was staring at the screen where a scrolling list of deleted entries was clearly timestamped with Sarah's personal login credentials. Every single requirement change that had caused the project to fail was there, deleted by Sarah's hand only 3 hours after she had verbally ordered them. "Breach of policy?" Leo let out a short, sharp bark of laughter that silenced the room. "I'm the coordination specialist, Sarah. My entire job description, the one you wrote to make me your personal scapegoat, gives me administrative ghost access to every single project folder to ensure seamless delivery. You gave me the keys to the kingdom because you were too lazy to do your own filing, and now you're mad that I saw you burning the furniture." Leo leaned back, crossing his arms, the picture of cold, calculated confidence. "You didn't just give verbal instructions, you gave written ones. Then panicked when you realized they were wrong and tried to erase the trail. But the system doesn't forget, and neither do I." Sarah's defensive wall was crumbling. She slammed her palms onto the table, the bang echoing like a gunshot. "This is a fabrication. He's a tech-savvy rat. He manipulated the metadata." She shined to the VP, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "You know me. You know my record. Why would I sabotage my own launch?" Leo is clearly trying to deflect from the fact that he missed the sign-off from Marcus. That's the real issue here. The lack of expert verification. She pointed a trembling finger at Marcus, who was still sitting like a statue. "Marcus, tell them he never reached out to you." Marcus slowly stood up. The room went dead silent. He didn't look at Sarah. He looked at the CEO. "He did reach out," Marcus said, his voice a low, resonant rumble that made Sarah's knees visibly shake. 14 times, actually. Each time, I was ready to sign off. And each time, I received a direct system notification, stating that my consultation task had been revoked by the lead product manager. Marcus pulled a single sheet of paper from his folder and slid it across the mahogany table. It wasn't a report, it was a screenshot of a direct message from Sarah to Marcus that read, "Stay out of the Apex files. I don't need a senior breathing down my neck and questioning my margins. Leo will handle the grunt work. If you interfere, I'll tell the board you're obstructing the timeline." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. Sarah's jaw literally hung open. She looked like a fish gasping for air, her panicked phase transitioning into pure desperation. I was just protecting the workflow. Marcus is too slow. He's a bottleneck." She scrambled for a new lie, her words tripping over each other. "I was going to have him review it after the launch. It was a strategic delay. Leo should have known better. He should have pushed back." "Push back?" Leo laughed again, and this time, the executives joined in. A chorus of mocking, cold chuckles that stripped Sarah of the last shred of her dignity. "Every time I pushed back, you threatened to have my contract terminated for insubordination. You even kept a draft of my firing notice on your desktop, didn't you? The one you showed me last Tuesday to remind me of my place." Leo tapped another key. The screen changed again. It wasn't a log this time. It was a high-definition audio file. The play icon hovered in the center of the screen like a guillotine blade. You love verbal instructions, Sarah. So I started recording them. You can't play that. That's illegal. I'll sue you into the Stone Age, Sarah screamed, lunging across the table to grab Leo's laptop. She was halfway across the mahogany surface, her hair disheveled, her expensive blazer caught on a chair leg, looking like a crazed animal. Two security guards who had been standing by the door moved forward and firmly gripped her arms, pulling her back. She struggled against them, her face contorted in a mask of pure unadulterated rage and terror. "Play it," the CEO commanded, his voice like ice. The recording filled the room. Sarah's voice, sharp and condescending, blasted through the premium speakers. "Listen to me, you little worm. I don't care if the technical specs are off. I need the bonus from this quarter's launch. Just sign it, send it, and if it blows up, I'll make sure the board thinks it was your clerical error." Who are they going to believe? A lead PM with a six-figure salary, or a coordinator who barely makes enough to cover his rent? "Now get out of my office and do what you're told." The silence that followed was absolute. It wasn't a professional silence. It was the silence of a grave. Sarah had stopped struggling. She was slumped in the arms of the security guards, her eyes glazed over, her mouth twitching. She was humiliated in a way that no apology could ever fix. The desperate energy had evaporated, replaced by the hollow, empty stare of someone who realized their entire world had just ended in front of the people they sought most to impress. "Leo," the CEO said, not even glancing at the broken woman in the room. "I think we've heard enough. Legal will be in touch with Sarah regarding the intentional sabotage of company assets and the fraudulent framing of a colleague." As for me," Leo interrupted, his voice cutting through the CEO's attempt at a corporate resolution. "I'm not looking for a promotion in a company that let a person like this run a department for 3 years. I'm looking for my severance, my unused vacation pay, and the public apology that Sarah is about to give me right here on camera." He pointed to the security camera in the corner of the boardroom. "Because I'm not just leaving, I'm making sure every recruiter in this city knows exactly why Sarah is suddenly looking for new opportunities." Sarah's eyes darted around the room, looking for a single ally, but she found only a wall of stony, disgusted faces. Even the VP who had pitied Leo earlier was now looking at her as if she were a cockroach that had crawled out of a sewer. Her humiliated state was rapidly curdling into something worse. The realization that her professional life wasn't just over. It was being incinerated in real time. "The recording, it's a deep fake," Sarah shrieked, her voice reaching a pitch that set teeth on edge. It was a pathetic, desperate lie, the kind told by a person who had run out of ground to retreat to. "He used AI, he's trying to extort me. You can't trust anything he says. He's a coordinator, he's a nobody." She turned her venomous gaze back to Leo, her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. "You think you're smart? You think this makes you a hero? You're still a loser, Leo. You'll always be a loser who plays with spreadsheets while people like me actually run the world." Leo didn't flinch. He didn't even look annoyed. He looked like a man watching a bug hit a windshield. "I'm glad you brought up running the world, Sarah," he said, his voice dripping with a casual, devastating irony. "Because while you were busy recording your little firing notice for me, I was busy making sure your six-figure salary was being audited by someone who actually knows how to read a balance sheet." He tapped the screen again. A new window popped up. A series of wire transfer records from a third-party vendor. "This is the Apex vendor, the one you insisted we use despite their higher DODs and lower quality. It turns out they've been sending consultation fees to a shell company registered in your sister's name for the last 18 months. The collective gasp from the board was audible. The CEO's face went from disappointed to murderous. This wasn't just a project failure anymore. This was grand-scale corporate embezzlement. That's personal. "You hacked my bank?" Sarah's voice was now a thin, strangled rasp. She was silenced not by choice but by the sheer weight of the crimes being laid bare. "I didn't have to hack anything," Leo replied, leaning forward, his eyes locked onto hers with a predatory focus. "You used your company laptop to check the shell company's balance every Friday at 4:30 p.m. You were so arrogant, so convinced that I was too insignificant to notice, that you didn't even bother to clear your cache. I didn't just find the fraud, Sarah. I sent the entire folder to the Internal Revenue Service and the SEC 10 minutes before I walked into this room. The notification should be hitting your personal email right about now." As if on cue, Sarah's phone, lying forgotten on the table, vibrated with a sharp, insistent buzz. She stared at it as if it were a live snake. Her hand hovered over the device, trembling so violently that she couldn't even swipe the screen. The silence in the boardroom was no longer heavy. It was suffocating. It was the silence of a vacuum sucking the air out of Sarah's lungs. You ruined me," she whispered, the words barely audible. The smug, sharp-tongued leader was gone. In her place was a broken, terrified woman who looked like she had aged 20 years in 20 minutes. "Why? All for a project?" "No," Leo said, his voice rising just enough to command the entire room one last time. "Not for a project. For every time you called me a worm. For every time you made a junior staffer cry in the break room. For every hour of sleep I lost fixing the disasters you created while you took the credit. You didn't fall because of a system or a culture. Sarah, you fell because you were too busy looking down at everyone to see the cliff you were walking over." Sarah tried to stand to make one last dignified exit, but her legs gave out. She slumped back into the chair, her expensive silk blazer caught on the armrest, pulling her shoulder into an awkward, pathetic angle. She looked up at the CEO, her eyes brimming with tears that no longer moved anyone. "Sir, please, I can fix this. I can get the money back. I can—" "Get her out of my sight," the CEO barked, his voice vibrating with rage. "And someone call the police. I want her escorted out in handcuffs. I don't want her taking a single pen from this office." The security guards didn't hesitate. They hauled Sarah out of the chair. She didn't fight them this time. She couldn't. She was a hollow shell, her spirit completely broken. As they dragged her toward the double doors, she passed Leo. She looked at him, her mouth opening as if to say one last insult, one last plea, but no sound came out. Her throat worked, her lips trembled, but she was finally silenced. Leo watched her go, his expression unreadable. He then turned to Marcus, who was still sitting calmly in the corner. Marcus gave him a single, barely perceptible nod of respect. The only recognition Leo had ever actually wanted. "Leo," the CEO said, his tone shifting to one of desperate damage control. "About that severance, let's talk. We can offer you a director position, a full bonus," and Leo didn't even let him finish. He picked up his laptop, tucked it under his arm, and walked toward the door. "Save the offer for someone who still believes in this place," Leo said over his shoulder. He stopped at the threshold, looking back at the room full of powerful people who had been ready to crucify him only an hour ago. "And by the way, Sarah was right about one thing. I am a coordinator, and I've coordinated my own exit perfectly." The last thing the board saw was Leo's shadow disappearing down the hallway. And the last thing Sarah saw as she was being led toward the elevator in cuffs was the reflection of her own face in the glass doors, smeared mascara, wild eyes, and a mouth frozen in a permanent silent scream of defeat. She looked exactly like the nobody she had spent years trying to convince the world Leo was. "Wait," she managed to croak out as the elevator doors began to close, her eyes fixed on the empty space where her career used to be. "Please, just 1 minute." But the doors slid shut with a cold mechanical click, leaving her in the dark, surrounded by the heavy, judgmental silence of her own making.
Watching Sarah crumble under the weight of her own digital footprint was easily the most satisfying train wreck I've witnessed this year. If you were in Leo's shoes, would you have accepted that desperate director promotion as a peace offering, or is walking away with the severance and her career in a body bag the ultimate power move? Just between us, I originally planned to let Marcus speak earlier, but I realized that his prolonged silence made Sarah's eventual meltdown feel so much more earned.